All right, let's just dive right in because Apple's prepping 9 new Macs with M2 processors. Let me bring up this story. Here we go. Let me put this over here so I can see what I'm actually doing. So here we go, my friends. I have a theory. I think we are on a 2-year upgrade cycle now, Lewis. I think Apple's going to spend the first year upgrading their consumer Macs to the M2, and then the next year going to the M2X or the M2 Pro, M2 Max. Oh, taking it way back there with the M2X. So I think we're on a 2-year upgrade cycle, and I think we're on a 4-year architecture cycle. This is just me thinking out loud here. So after 4 years, we're going to move up into some like super impressive new architecture, and it's going to take us another leap forward. That's my theory. So 2 years of the same architecture, but each year having its own like individual numbers, like M1, M2, and then we'll go to M3, M4, right? So I think we are in a 2-year upgrade cycle for M2. Wait, did I say that wrong? I did say that wrong. Never mind. Let's just move on.
Gee whiz.
I'm talking so fast.
I was going to say, I actually was looking to see if there was like a 1.5x button that I had pressed. But that can't be true because it's real time.
My brain just moves that fast. So let me just get into the story here before the preamble here is way too long. So let's talk about the M2 Macs because apparently we got a bunch of them on the way. Apple reportedly has half a dozen Macs with next generation M2 processors in testing. These are a mix of MacBooks and desktops, and this is according to Bloomberg here. Some supposedly will arrive later in 2022, and some will be in 2023. Let's see here. We're going to be getting a MacBook Air with an M2 chip, and according to Bloomberg, the Mac will have an 8-core CPU and 10-core GPU. That's up from 8 graphic cores in the current MacBook Air. You guys are going to like this. I know there's a lot of people out there that were kind of disappointed that we didn't get a Mac Mini update with a beefier SoC, and if that's you, then I think you're going to like what you're about to hear here, okay? Because you don't necessarily want to go up and spend all the extra money for the Mac Studio. And so we are also potentially getting a Mac Mini with we're definitely getting a Mac Mini with an M2 chip. This will have the same specifications as the MacBook Air, but it looks like they're also testing out like an M2 Pro option, which that's a heck of a value right there. If you can get a Mac Mini with an M2 Pro and 10G Ethernet and spend, $1,500 on that as opposed to $2,000 or $4,000 on a Mac Studio, that's going to be a sweet spot for a lot of people, I think. All right, moving on. An entry-level MacBook Pro with an M2 chip. This will have the same specifications as the MacBook Air because, as we know, it's pick your form factor with Apple now, right? You basically pick the SoC that you want, and then that SoC performs the same across all the different platforms. Unfortunately, I think that for us pro users, this actually ends up being a negative for us because we were expecting that because the M1 Max would be able to be cooled more effectively and given a little bit more juice in the Mac Studio, we thought it would run faster than the MacBook Pro version of the M1 Max, which runs screaming hot. But it seems like that's not the case. It seems like Apple is limiting the performance in the Mac Studio on the M1 Pro on the M1 Max because they don't want it to be performing faster than the other M1 Maxes. That seems to be the way it's going, and that's a major bummer because I thought, and we all kind of thought, that when they put the M1 Max in the Mac Studio, they'll crank up the juice. It's got an insane cooler on it, and it would run faster than the M1 Max and the MacBook Pro. Doesn't seem to be the case, which is a major bummer. Okay, MacBook Pro. 14-inch, M2 Pro, M2 Max chips. The M2 Max will have 12 cores and 38 graphic cores. That's a very odd number, up from 10 CPU cores and 32 graphic cores in the current model. And then the 16-inch MacBook Pro, well, it will be larger, but have the same M2 Pro, M2 Max. And then, I know what you're thinking to yourself, Lewis, where's the Mac Pro, the successor? We don't know, but apparently it's on the way. And Bloomberg doesn't know what they're going to cram into that dang thing, but it's going to be the successor of the M1 Ultra chip, quote unquote. So that's what you can have, what you can look forward to. Will they call it? I think they're going to call it something that is beyond the M1 Ultra naming convention. Yeah, it's going to be like the Ultra Max, something like that. So there you go. There's all the new M2 machines on the way. I mean, it will probably be at least 3 months before we see another new machine. Apple's going to give it some breathing space.
I don't know.
I take that back. Unless they announce the Mac Pro at WWDC, which actually.
It's a couple months from now. And they actually, the latest rumors just coming out right now.
Yep.
MacBook Air, Mac Mini with M2 chip might show up at WWDC. Not the Pro.
Really, man, that would actually be really interesting if they did the M2. I have the M1 Ultra Mac Studio. Oh, man, I won't get into it. Yeah. You guys already know how I feel, right? The M1 Ultra, it's just turning out to be not as impressive as you would think it would be for the extra $2,000. And there's a multitude of reasons why it seems like that's the case. I mean, Final Cut Pro just got updated. I'm going into it already. We had Max Tech on the show last week. Go watch the videos. And I dropped some highlight videos on the Cult of Mac channel. Watch.thecultcast.com. You can see the live shows. It's just truly sad. I thought we were in for a major performance increase here, but now I'm kind of wishing I had just got the M1 Max 14-inch MacBook Pro and just moved on with my life.
You just need to make peace with this. Just make peace with the fact you got an awesome deal or an awesome computer that's not going to be out of date in at least 2 months, and then just go.
Yeah, right. Watch them drop the M2. This is why I think that they're on a 2-year cycle for moving between SoC numbers, right? So they go the first year they release mostly the consumer grade stuff, and the next year it's the pro stuff, and then they move up to the M3, and then 2 years later they move to the M4 or whatever. And the reason I think they do that is because they don't want to have you buy a Mac Studio with M1 Ultra and then a year later have it be out of date. I don't think Apple they want you to get like over a year, maybe 2 years of top tier performance before it's outdated. That's just my feeling about it. I could be wrong.
Well, yeah. But if you're saying that the M1 Ultra doesn't do that much better than the M1 Max, I can't even keep all this straight anymore. So what do you think the M2 is going to do? It's going to be worse than those two?
Well, the M2 is going to be better than the M1 for sure.
The regular M1.
Yeah, it's going to have more GPU cores. It's probably going to have a faster clock speed. So in single core performance, the M2 single core to single core might actually outperform the Mac Studio. In fact, I'd be surprised if it didn't, because it's going to be clocked faster and it might be more efficient. But in multi-core, of course, it will get destroyed because the Mac Studio with M1 Max or M1 Ultra is going to be insane because there's so many cores. But this is the thing, like a lot of things that you do don't require all those cores. So you're getting all of these extra cores, but the cores are just sitting there unused because the software isn't optimized to take advantage of them. And that's part of the problem. And we're getting optimizations now for the extra cores, like Adobe's been updating their software and Final Cut Pro. Well, they say they updated their software. They released 10.6.2, but there don't really seem to be any major improvements that are obvious to anyone.
So I was just going to ask. So you went and saw all the things in the past week that show, and it's just not that.
It's just not. It's just kind of depressing. Yeah. I mean, if anyone's curious, go check out Max Tech's channel. I mean, they're like, I don't think anyone is doing better than them when it comes to benchmarking. It's actually really crazy. I was reading a Reddit thread where one of the Max Tech's videos were posted, and there's just all these greasy slime balls in there just slamming Max Tech for putting out clickbait, and I'm like, clearly you didn't even watch the video. Like, they literally did all the benchmarks and they showed you that the M1 Ultra wasn't performing as well as the M1 Max in some tests, or it was on par. I mean, they just showed you the data. That's all they did, and you don't believe it. It's like you refuse to believe that that's the truth, even though they show you all the benchmarks. They even show you doing the benchmarks, and they just refuse to believe it, and they were clowning on them. And I was like, you guys are morons. Like they're not trying to trick you. Like they just want to show you that if you are someone who is thinking about spending the extra money, it may not be worth it to you. And if you want to go do it like I did, like I went into it knowing that I probably overspent. I went into it knowing that. And I was like, this is a bummer. I even thought about returning it, as I've talked about many times. I decided to keep it. But at least I know going in, and I'm grateful that I know what I know, right? I'm not surprised. But some people just refuse to believe it. But anyway, I think that's more of a commentary on the people that are hanging out on r/Apple. They can't believe it. They just can't believe it.